The officer's hand never made it to the handcuffs. Not because Bruce Lee ran, not because he fought back, but because in the space of 3 seconds, 3 quiet, unhurried seconds, the most feared martial artist in the world did something no one in that precinct had ever seen before. And by the end of the night, the officer who had come to arrest him would walk away with something far more valuable than a collar, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. Los Angeles, California. The summer of 1967. The city was alive with tension, civil rights marches, anti-war protests, and a cultural revolution that had set the streets humming with a kind of electricity that hadn't existed before. It was past midnight in a neighborhood on the east side of Hollywood, where the neon signs flickered and the alley smelled of cigarette smoke and motor oil. A diner at the corner of the block was still open, its windows glowing amber against the dark blue of the night. Inside, Bruce Lee sat alone in a corner booth. He was 30 years old, 5'7", 138 pounds. He wore a simple white t-shirt and dark trousers. His arms rested easily on the table, a half-eaten plate of food in front of him, a cup of tea beside it. He looked, to anyone passing by, like an ordinary young man. He was anything but Officer Raymond Holt, not his real name, but close enough to the man described in accounts from those who were there, was a 14-year veteran of the LAPD. Big through the shoulders, wide through the jaw, the kind of man who walked through doorways and made them seem smaller. He had received a call about a disturbance near the diner. Someone had reported a fight nearby, and witnesses had described an Asian male in a white shirt. Holt had the description, he had the location, and he had 17 years of certainty behind him. Certainty that the job was simple. Find the suspect, make the arrest, close the case. He pushed open the diner door, and his eyes landed immediately on Bruce Lee. He walked over without hesitation. "You, stand up. I need to ask you some questions." Bruce Lee looked up slowly. He didn't startle. He didn't tense. He simply looked at the officer the way a man might look at the weather, with calm, neutral attention. "Of course," he said. What happened in the next few minutes was described differently by everyone who witnessed it, but all accounts agree on the essential shape of the confrontation. The officer, working from his assumption, became aggressive. He demanded Bruce Lee step outside. He used the kind of voice that has ended 1,000 arguments before they could begin, low, firm, carrying the full weight of authority behind it. He reached for Bruce Lee's arm, and Bruce Lee moved. Not away, not forward. He simply shifted, barely a few inches, and the officer's hand closed on empty air. It was so subtle that most people in the diner didn't even notice it had happened. But Holt noticed. He had been grabbing people's arms for 14 years. He knew what it felt like when someone wasn't where they were supposed to be. He looked at the small man in front of him with new eyes. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Holt said. Bruce Lee said nothing. He simply waited, and the silence itself was a kind of answer. There is a principle in Jeet Kune Do, the martial art Bruce Lee had spent his entire adult life developing, that runs counter to almost everything the Western mind has been taught about strength. It is not the biggest force that wins. It is the most efficient one. Bruce Lee had studied Wing Chun under the legendary Ip Man in Hong Kong. He had trained with boxers, wrestlers, fencers, and street fighters. He had broken down every fighting tradition he could find and rebuilt it from the bones up, keeping only what worked, discarding everything that was performance or ego or tradition for its own sake. He had also studied people. He had studied fear and aggression and pride the way a physicist studies forces, identifying them, measuring them, understanding exactly how they behaved under pressure. And standing in that diner, with a large officer reaching for him and an entire room watching, Bruce Lee was not afraid. He was simply reading the situation, the way a river reads the landscape, not resisting it, not surrendering to it, but finding the exact path through. "Be water, my friend." It was a phrase he would make famous, but he had been living it long before he ever said it out loud. Holt had been embarrassed, not visibly, not yet, but internally, the way a man is embarrassed when something he does every day suddenly doesn't work, and he can't explain why. He stepped closer. He was 6'2" and weighed close to 220 pounds. He had handled drug dealers and gang members and men with knives who had nothing left to lose. A 138-pound man in a diner was not a problem. Outside, he said again. Now, Bruce Lee looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He smiled, not mockingly, not with arrogance, but with a kind of genuine warmth. The smile of a man who understands something that hasn't been said yet, and is patient enough to wait until the other person catches up. "Officer," he said quietly, "I think there may be some confusion here. I have been sitting in this booth for the past hour. I haven't been outside since before 10 o'clock. I believe the person you're looking for is someone else." Holt stared at him. "That's what they all say." "Yes," Bruce Lee agreed pleasantly. "I imagine it is." The officer was not in the habit of being reasonable after he had already decided to make an arrest. But something about this particular encounter had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't quite explain. And so, in a rare departure from his usual approach, he asked the diner owner if he'd seen this man come in. The owner confirmed it. Bruce Lee had been in the booth since 9:45 p.m. The disturbance had been called in at 11:10. The math was undeniable. Holt stood there for a moment. Then he looked at Bruce Lee. "You should have just told me that right away." "You didn't ask," Bruce Lee said, still pleasantly. He wasn't being confrontational. He was simply stating a fact. Holt pulled up a chair. It was not something he normally did. He had never sat down with a former suspect, and simply talked. But something about this small, impossibly calm man had broken through the armor of his professional certainty, and he found himself doing something remarkable, being curious. "What do you do?" Holt asked. "I teach," Bruce Lee said. "I also make films, but mostly I teach people how to move, how to think, how to face conflict without being destroyed by it." Holt looked at him. "Martial arts, among other things," Bruce Lee said. "The martial part is almost secondary." What happened next has been told and retold in the circles where Bruce Lee's legend lives, and like all great stories, it has grown in the telling. But the core of it is this. Bruce Lee offered to show Holt something. He stood up from the booth. He asked the officer to hold out his hand, palm down, as if resting it on a table. He told Holt that he was going to place a coin on the back of his hand, and that before Bruce Lee could take it away, Holt could close his fist and catch it. It sounded absurd. It sounded like a bar trick. Holt agreed. He lost the coin every time. Not because Bruce Lee was faster, though he was extraordinarily so, but because Bruce Lee had explained, patiently and precisely, the science behind why he would always lose. He talked about reaction time, about the difference between initiating a movement and responding to one, about how the body's nervous system creates a gap between perception and action, and how a trained fighter learns to live inside that gap. The other officers who had gathered, summoned by word of mouth from the back of the precinct, stood and listened. One of them tried the coin trick. He lost too. Another tried. Same result. Bruce Lee wasn't showing off. He was teaching. He explained every principle out loud, step by step, the way a great teacher always does, making the miraculous logical, making the impossible understandable. By the time he was finished, there were 8 officers standing around him, and not one of them was thinking about the original disturbance call. Holt walked Bruce Lee to the door when it was over. It was past 2 in the morning. The diner had long since closed, and the night outside was quiet and cool. "I owe you an apology," Holt said. It came out stiffly, the way apologies do from men who don't make them often. "I jumped to a conclusion." Bruce Lee waved it off. "You had a job to do. You did it the way you knew how. That's not a sin. That's just a starting point." Holt was quiet for a moment. Then, "The thing with the coin, can that be taught?" "Everything can be taught," Bruce Lee said. "The question is always whether someone is willing to empty their cup first." Holt frowned. "Empty their cup? If your cup is already full," Bruce Lee said, "there's no room for anything new. The officer who already knows everything he needs to know, he learns nothing. But the officer who admits he doesn't know, him, I can teach." He looked at Holt steadily. "You admitted it. That took something." He put out his hand. Holt shook it. According to those who knew Holt in later years, he spoke about that night often. Not as the night he tried to arrest Bruce Lee, but as the night he finally understood what it meant to be a student. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. The world he left behind was still trying to understand what he had given it. It wasn't just the kicks. It wasn't just the speed that looked like camera tricks, even when cameras weren't rolling. It wasn't the films, or the philosophy, or the legend of a small man who had humbled giants. It was something simpler and harder than all of that. It was the idea that the greatest power available to a human being is not force. It is clarity, the ability to see a situation without the distortion of ego, fear, or assumption, the ability to respond rather than react, the ability to stand in the eye of someone else's storm and remain completely, impossibly still. On the night a police officer tried to arrest him, Bruce Lee didn't fight. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He simply waited, with total confidence, for the truth to do what truth always does, rise to the surface on its own, without needing to be forced. And then he sat down with the man who had come to take him away, and gave him something he hadn't asked for and couldn't have known he needed. A lesson. That is the Bruce Lee that history forgets when it gets too busy talking about the one-inch punch. Not the warrior, the teacher. And if you want to understand everything he stood for, every film, every philosophy, every technique, you have to start there. Not with the fist, with the empty cup.